So I first heard about the story of Hans and Rudolf when I listened to the eulogy at my great uncle's memorial service. And that's when I found out that he had become a Nazi hunter at the very end of the Second World War. And it was a total shock to me. None of us in the family knew the story. We didn't talk to Uncle Hans about what he did during the war. And then to hear that he was a Nazi hunter was amazing. And to be honest, I didn't really believe it at first. And then I went to some archives and I dug up some old documents and I saw his name in print. I was like, wow, it really is true. I spent 7 years researching the book and it took me to archives around the world. But maybe the most interesting thing for me was when I actually met the grandson of Rudolf Hoss and I went to Auschwitz with him. And then I met the daughter of Rudolf Hoss, who actually lives in Washington, D.C., North America. And both of them were fascinating characters. Perhaps the daughter was most interesting because she still hadn't worked out quite her own story. She still loved her father, she still slept under a picture of him every night, which was amazing. But she was still aware of what her father had done. She'd seen the movies Sophie's Choice and Schindler's List, and so I think she was conflicted. I saw Rudolf Höss as a monster, a one-dimensional villain. He was the greatest mass murderer of all time. At least 1 million people died under his supervision, maybe many more. But the more I investigated him as a human being, I learned that he was more complicated, that he was sensitive to a degree, which I found quite difficult. It was easier for me to think of him as a monster. When I met his daughter, she said he was a sensitive man. He was caring and affectionate. He read stories to them. When you read his memoirs, it's clear that he did emotionally react to what he did. Of course, it may be self-serving that he wrote this later on. But he does appear as a man who is not a psychopath, which in some ways is more scary, because what one thinks then is this could happen to anyone. Any culture could have someone like this come forward. And that in many ways is a good lesson, I think, from this, that this is not in history, that this could happen still today. It doesn't have to be some mad monster, some psychopath. I've wrestled with quite a lot of issues. One is, what is history? I was amazed to find that sometimes two different people in the same place who experienced the same event remembered it differently. And so for me that started to question what is actually recorded truth, what is history? And then within my own family, I started to think about where did we come from in terms of could we be proud of our history? My uncle, even though he did extraordinary things, there were some things which I was a bit worried about. You know, he did some things which I wasn't so sure about. And so I learned that there are heroes and villains, but we have complicated characters.